Thank you for listening to IFES on Elections. I'm Laura Osio. On November 16th, Kazakhstan's President Nursultan Nazarbayev, who has ruled since the nation became independent in 1991, dissolved parliament and called for a snap election to take place on January 15th. This election, which was originally scheduled for August 2012, is supposed to allow a second party into the legislature. Anthony Bowyer, IFES program manager for the Caucasus and Central Asia, tells us how this move will affect political parties and what it means for democracy in the country. Anthony, what is behind the decision to move the election up by 7 months?
Interestingly, this follows a pattern that we've seen by President Nursultan Nazarbayev to advance elections in the interests of democracy, quote unquote. We know Kazakhstan has had a single party in parliament since the last parliamentary elections for the Majlis, the lower house of parliament, since 2007. Nur Otan, the president's party, in fact, has been the only party to have seats in that body. We know as well that Kazakhstan's 20-year anniversary of declaring independence from the USSR is coming up in December, and it is seen by some as an effort to promote a feel-good atmosphere by promoting an election that will ultimately, they believe, lead to a multi-party parliament. How are they doing this? Well, they actually had to change the election code to make an allowance for a second party to gain seats. As we know, in Kazakhstan, there's a 7% threshold for the party list system. That's a high percentage. Only one party at this point is able by one means or another to ascend that barrier. What they have decided is that if no second party is able to surmount the 7%, there is a provision to give the second place finisher, irrespective of the percentage of votes they receive nationally, several seats in the parliament. Details are still a little bit uncertain or cloudy, but there certainly will be at least a two-party parliament. And that symbolically is very important for Kazakhstan to say that it has a multi-party legislature.
And how will having less time to prepare their campaigns affect political parties?
Political parties in Kazakhstan are relatively weak. There have not been opposition parties in parliament for a number of years. And the current situation is that there are several would-be challengers who have not been able to register their parties yet, such as the Alga movement, as well Tabigat, which is an environmental movement, has not been able to gain registration, as well as a new movement called Kalik is in the process of registering now. And we do know, in fact, one of the main challengers to Nur Otan supremacy, the Communist Party, has been suspended for 6 months. So who then are the parties who could challenge Nur Otan in a parliamentary election? There are two possibly. One of them is a relatively pro-presidential party, Akjol. There is a possible opposition party, Azat, which could challenge for seats. But the bottom line is there is less than 2 months until the election. That is a woefully insufficient amount of time with which to not only register, but to mount a legitimate campaign. If parties to this point have been fighting issues of registration, how are they able to project their influence and attract supporters throughout the country? They haven't been. And for those who have now had an election thrust upon them some 9 months early, how can they get out the vote, so to speak? How can they conduct their campaigns? How can they amount the resources to conduct a nationwide election campaign?
Can this move be said to be in the interests of democracy?
Well, I think that's illusory. I don't believe that this is a step forward for Kazakhstani democracy per se. Certainly the notion of having an opposition voice in government is a good one, a necessary one. I think we have to look at the pattern here, however, of how elections have been managed in 2011. First, an early presidential election brought forward nearly 2 years, which saw Mr. Nazarbayev win an overwhelming majority of votes. In effect, he is president for life. As well as the moving ahead of a parliamentary election in which there will be a fabricated second party winning seats. Now, I say fabricated because unless the rules themselves are changed, there is an allowance made for a second party to get in. So, to me, it's not necessarily a legitimate second party. Perhaps the second party will surmount the 7% barrier. That could happen, I suppose. But we have to just not focus on the result or the fact that Kazakhstan will technically have a multi-party parliament. We have to focus on the process that ran before it. And the process as it is now is a severely constrained pre-election period in which virtually nobody else can compete.
Thank you, Anthony. For more IFES on elections, please visit ifes.org.